To attract and retain high-quality talent, organizations design reward packages to appeal to a variety of people. Companies address pay and benefits with a total rewards philosophy. This total rewards package includes all forms of compensation, both monetary and non-monetary rewards provided by an organization to attract, motivate, and retain employees. An effective total rewards approach balances the interests and costs of the organization with the needs and expectations of its employees. Since labor represents such a major cost item to companies, top management and HR executives work towards aligning total reward systems and components with the objectives of an organization. Several strategic decisions guide the design of compensation practices, including legal compliance, cost-effectiveness considerations, internal and external equity, optimal pay mixes, performance enhancement from the organization, performance recognition and talent management for employees, and enhanced recruitment, involvement, and retention of employees. Employers strive to maintain their costs at a level that rewards employees fairly for their knowledge, skills, and abilities and performance accomplishments while allowing the organization to remain competitive. World at Work is a leading professional association that focuses on total rewards and provides a great total rewards model that you should check out. The organization has developed this well-respected model that includes tangible direct, tangible indirect, and intangible rewards that are summarized here. This figure identifies these three primary components of the total rewards package. It shows total rewards can be broadly defined and also indicates that intangible rewards are an important aspect of the package. Let's look at tangible rewards. Tangible rewards can be measured, and it's possible to calculate the monetary value of each reward. Employees can easily compare tangible reward offered by various organizations. One tangible component of the compensation program is direct compensation, the monetary rewards for work done and performance results achieved. Base pay and variable pay are the most common forms of direct compensation. The most common indirect compensation is employee benefits, as you see here. Let's take a look at each in a bit more detail. The basic compensation that an employer receives, usually provided as an hourly wage or salary, is called base pay. Many organizations use two base pay categories, hourly and salaried, which are identified according to the way pay is determined and the nature of jobs. Hourly pay is the most common and is based on time. Employees paid by the hour receive wages, which are called payments, calculated on the basis of time worked. In contrast, employees paid a salary receive the same payment each period regardless of the number of hours worked. Another type of direct pay is variable pay, compensation linked directly to individual, team, or organization performance. The most common types of variable pay are bonuses, incentive program payments, equity awards, and commissions. Hay Group, a popular and well-known renowned compensation organization, found that companies are increasing the use of variable pay as a means of aligning compensation with changing business strategies and improving performance. Many organizations provide indirect rewards in the form of employee benefits. With indirect compensation, employees receive financial rewards without receiving actual cash. A benefit is an indirect reward given to an employee or a group of employees for organizational membership, regardless of performance. Examples of benefits are health insurance, vacation payment, retirement pensions, and so on. Alternatively, intangible rewards cannot be easily measured or quantified. How would an employee put a dollar value on having decision-making authority or working in a supportive work environment? The perceived value of such intangible rewards can differ among employees, making the total rewards approach complex. Recent research shows that work-life balance programs and employee well-being efforts make a significant difference to workers and in some cases can outweigh tangible rewards offered by a company. Pay practices are regulated by several key laws that address issues such as overtime pay, minimum wage standards, hours of work, and pay equity. The following discussion examines the laws and regulations affecting base compensation, including the Fair Labor Standards Act, pay equity laws, and independent contractor regulation. The primary federal law affecting compensation is the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, which was passed in 1938. Compliance with FLSA provisions is enforced by the Wage and Hour Division of the U.S. Department of Labor. Penalties for wage and hour violations often include awards of up to 2 years of back pay for affected current and former employees along with a monetary penalty. Willful violations may be penalized by up to 3 years of back pay. The Department of Labor recently launched a public service campaign called We Can Help, an outreach program to encourage low-wage and immigrant workers to report pay complaints. The provisions of the original Fair Labor Standards Act and subsequent revisions focus on these areas: minimum wage, limits on the use of child labor, and overtime provisions. The FLSA sets a minimum wage to be paid to a broad spectrum of covered employees. Congressional action is the only way minimum wage can be changed. A lower minimum wage is set for tipped employees, such as restaurant workers, but their compensation must equal or exceed minimum wage when average tips are included. The current minimum wage of $7.25 per hour was part of the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2007. 8 states have raised minimum wage levels by an average of 32 cents per hour. If a state's minimum wage is higher than the federal minimum wage, employers must pay the higher wage. Employers that operate in multiple states must monitor legislation that might affect their operations. Some research suggests that minimum wage increases lead to a reduction in employment or working hours for entry-level workers, while other studies show that there's no impact on employment. The child labor provisions of the FLSA set up the minimum age for employment with unlimited hours at 16. For hazardous occupations, the minimum age is 18 years. Individuals 14 to 15 years old may work outside school hours with certain limitations. Many employers require age certificates for employees because the FLSA makes the employer responsible for determining an individual's age. Age certificates are supplied by high schools. The FLSA established overtime pay requirements at 1.5 times the regular pay rate for all hours worked over 40 in a week, except for exempt employees. There are other exemptions to overtime requirements, such as farm workers, but these exceptions are rare. The work week is defined as a consecutive period of 168 hours, 24 hours, 7 days a week, which does not have to be a calendar week. Hospitals and nursing homes are allowed a special definition of the work week to accommodate their 24/7 scheduling demands. No daily number of hours requiring overtime is set, except for special provisions relating to hospitals and other specialty designated organizations. Thus, if an organization operates a 4-day, 10-hour schedule, no overtime pay is required by the Act until the worker exceeds 40 hours. Exempt employees hold positions for which employers are not required to pay overtime. Non-exempt employees must be paid overtime. The current FLSA regulations used to establish whether or not a job qualifies for exempt status classifies jobs into 5 categories, as shown here. The regulations identify several factors to be considered when determining the exempt status. The regulations are complex, and thorough review of each job is recommended to ensure proper classification to prevent misclassifying employees. Job duties can change over time, and it's wise to periodically review all jobs in the organization. For details on each exemption, visit the U.S. Department of Labor's website at www.dol.gov. Now on to pay equity laws. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, and national origin. However, prior to its passage, pay discrimination on the basis of sex was outlawed under the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Since then, additional laws have been enacted to counter wage discrimination on the basis of sex. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 prohibits companies from using different wage scales for men and women performing substantially the same jobs. Pay differences can be justified on the basis of merit, seniority, quality of work, experience, and factors other than gender. Similar pay must be given for jobs requiring equal skills, equal responsibility, effort, or jobs done under similar working conditions. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was enacted in 2008 in response to a Supreme Court decision restricting the statute of limitations allowed under the Equal Pay Act for claiming pay discrimination based on sex. Under the Equal Pay Act, an employee alleging discrimination had up to 300 days to file a claim. The Fair Pay Act essentially treats each paycheck as a new act of discrimination. Pay discrimination need be intentional to be unlawful. Pay practices resulting in disparate impact are also actionable. Steps to reduce liability include conducting periodic disparate treatment impact analysis of compensation plans, properly documenting all compensation decisions, and retaining complete pay records for an appropriate duration, and limiting discretion in the pay decisions in higher levels of the organization. The growing use of contingent workers by many organizations has drawn the attention of several enforcement agencies such as the IRS, DOL, and the Treasury Department. When workers are improperly classified as independent contractors, payroll tax revenues are lost and workers are not insured for unemployment or work-related injuries. According to some estimates, 3.4 million employees are misclassified as independent contractors, costing the United States $54 billion in unpaid employment taxes, $15 billion in unpaid FICA and unemployment taxes. For the employer, classifying someone as an independent contractor rather than an employee has major advantages. The employer does not have to pay Social Security, unemployment, or workers' compensation costs for independent contractors. The additional payroll levies may add about 10% or more to the cost of hiring an individual as an employee. The misclassification of employees as independent contractors has become such a serious problem that the IRS launched an amnesty program to allow employers to report misclassifications and pay for past payroll tax obligations. The hope was that the voluntary classification settlement program, employees would come forward rather than wait for an audit, which is more likely to be costly and time-consuming. Federal and state entities rely on criteria for independent contractors established by the Internal Revenue Service. This figures lists the factors used by the IRS to determine whether or not an individual can be classified as a contractor. A worker does not have to meet all criteria, and no single factor is decisive in establishing status. Each case is analyzed on a case-by-case basis. Most people work for monetary rewards. Whether they receive base pay or variable pay, the extent to which employees perceive their compensation to be fair often affects their performance and how they view their jobs and employers. Employees are more likely to have lower job satisfaction and leave jobs when they feel inadequately compensated. If an employer's rewards are not viewed as adequate compared to other organizations, the employee is likely to experience high turnover. This also creates greater difficulty in recruiting qualified individuals. Internal equity means that employees are compensated fairly with regard to the knowledge, skills, and abilities they use in their job, as well as their responsibilities, accomplishments, and job performance. Employees continually assess their effort-reward ratio in comparison to their coworkers. Two key issues here, procedural justice and distributed justice, are particularly important in internal equity. Some basic statistical analysis is needed to determine the competitiveness of a company's reward practices. Whether an organization's total rewards practices are competitive has a significant impact on employees' views of compensation fairness. Providing competitive compensation to employees is a concern for all employers. Organizations face the challenge of whether or not to adopt practices common in an industry or differentiate the firm by novel or distinct practices. Pay practices that work for one organization may not work for others. Larger organizations may have higher compensation levels than smaller organizations because of higher productivity and economies of scale. The compensation mix is also affected by the size of the firm, with larger organizations spending more on indirect compensation than smaller. Many organizations establish policies about where they wish to be positioned in the labor market using a quartile strategy, as illustrated in this figure. The quartile strategy reflects the overall market position where the organization sets its compensation levels. An employer using a first quartile strategy chooses to lag the market by paying below market levels for several reasons. Target pay ranges are about 75% of firms above and 25% below. Using a lag the market strategy is risky and should be considered in terms of possible consequences before an organization implements. A third quartile strategy uses an aggressive lead the market approach, in which we target pay ranges so that 25% of other firms pay above and 75% pay below. Most employers position themselves in the second quartile or the median, the middle of the market as determined by pay data from surveys and other employees' compensation plans. Choosing this level attempts to balance employer cost pressures and the need to attract and retain employees by providing compensation levels that meet the market for the company's jobs. This figure shows how a base compensation system is developed using compensation philosophy through job analysis and two-job evaluation. The two general approaches for valuing jobs are job evaluation and market pricing. Both methods use relative comparisons to determine the worth of jobs in an organization. To comply with equal pay and non-discrimination laws, companies should review the relative standing of each job to ensure jobs held by women and minority are not consistently ranked at the lowest in the organization. Let's take a look at internal and external focused job evaluation. Job evaluation is a formal, systematic process to determine the relative worth of jobs in an organization. Employers can adopt one of several alternative methods. The ranking method is a simple system that places jobs in order, from highest to lowest, by value in the organization. This is a quantitative method in which the entire job is considered rather than individual components. The ranking method generally is more appropriate for small organizations with few jobs. The classification method of job evaluation uses written description of job classes in which each job is put into a grade according to the class it best matches. A major difficulty with this method is the subjective judgments that are needed to develop class descriptions and place jobs accurately in them. The most widely used job evaluation method, the point factor method, looks at compensable factors in a group of similar jobs and assigns weights or points to them. A compensable factor identifies a dimension that's part of every job that can be rated for each. For example, all jobs require some level of education and experience for successful performance. The point factor method is the most popular job evaluation approach because it's relatively simple to use and considers the components of a job rather than the total job. However, point factor systems have been criticized for reinforcing traditional organization structure and job rigidity. While the point factor method has served employers well for many years, the trend is moving to a more externally focused approach. More companies are moving to market pricing, which uses market pay data to identify the relative value of jobs based on what other employers pay for similar. Key to market pricing is identifying relative market pay data for jobs that are good matches with the employer's jobs, geographic considerations, strategies, philosophies, and desired market competitiveness levels. The switch to market pricing as part of a strategic compensation decision can ensure market competitiveness of compensation levels and practices. However, there will not always be a perfect match in the external market. When establishing a pay structure, organizations use pay grades to group individual jobs having approximately the same job worth. Although no set rules govern the establishment of pay grades, 11 to 17 grades are generally used in organizations. Two methods are commonly used to establish pay grades are job evaluation data and market banding. One approach for determining pay grades uses job evaluation points or other data gathered from traditional job evaluation discussed earlier in this presentation. The process ties pay survey information to job evaluation data by plotting a market line that shows the relationship between job value as determined by job evaluation points and the value as determined by pay survey rates. Market lines are developed by calculating the regression equation using statistical analysis techniques. This figure shows an example of a market line and regression used in setting a particular set of pay policy. A market line uses data to place jobs having similar point values into pay grades, pay ranges that can then be computed for each grade. Once pay grades are determined, the pay range for each pay grade must be established. Using the market line as a starting point, the employer can determine the minimum and maximum pay levels as you see here for each pay grade by making the market line midpoint the line of the pay structure. For example, in a particular pay grade, the minimum value may be 20% above the midpoint located in the market line, and the maximum value might be 20% below it. Once pay grades and ranges have been computed, the current pay of employees is compared with the proposed ranges. It's common to have a broader pay range for higher level jobs because more discretion is needed to reflect capability and performance differences.